My folks kicked me out when I was just 17. You'll come crawling back in a month, my mom sneered with this smug little smile. Then my dad slammed the door right in my face. I was furious. And honestly, I didn't even look back. Lily years later, I had a bunch of missed calls lighting up my phone. They were practically begging me to talk. I never really planned to share any of this online, not publicly. But after stumbling across some posts that hit a little too close to home, I figured, what the hell, maybe putting it all down will help me process it. Maybe someone out there, going through something similar with their own family, might find something useful in my story. Who knows? So, here goes. I'm Michael, 26 now, but this whole thing started back when I was 17, smack in the middle of junior year of high school. Truth is, I was never the golden boy my parents hoped for. My dad worked at a factory, and my mom had a receptionist job. We weren't wealthy or anything, but we got by okay in our little town. They had this whole roadmap for my life already drawn up. Get good grades, head off to state college like my dad did, marry some sweet girl from the neighborhood, pop out a couple kids, and live out their version of the American dream. There was just one issue: I couldn't stand school. Not 'cause I was stupid or lazy or whatever. I could pull decent grades when I actually tried. Thing is, I've got ADHD. Didn't even know it until much later, after everything blew up. Sitting still for hours while someone droned on about stuff I didn't care about felt like torture. What I did care about was using my hands, actually doing stuff. I loved building things, fixing things. When I was 15, I spent an entire summer helping our neighbor, Jack, fix up his garage. That was the first time I felt like I was actually good at something. My parents weren't fans. Every time I mentioned maybe going into the trades or picking up a skill, my mom would get this tight-lipped look, like I'd said I wanted to be a professional dumpster diver. And my dad? He'd launch into these long-winded speeches about living up to my potential, and how people like us don't work with their hands. Looking back now, I think they just cared a lot about how things looked. They wanted something to brag about, a son with a degree, not a kid swinging a hammer for a living. Things had been tense for a while. I was working part-time at a local shop after school, quietly saving up cash because, deep down, I had a feeling I might need it. My grades started slipping because, honestly, I just didn't give a damn anymore. Dinner was a battleground, always some fight about college apps, my future, or how I was throwing my life away. Everything came to a head in April, about 6 weeks out from graduation. I'd gotten into state college. Not really by choice, my parents basically filled out the application for me. But at the same time, I'd been looking into a trade school for construction. It cost way less, didn't take 4 years, and actually taught stuff I cared about. I'd even gotten accepted, and they offered me a partial scholarship based on a portfolio I'd put together from different projects. I thought dinner would be a good time to break the news. Big mistake. As soon as I said, trade program, my dad threw his fork so hard it bounced off his plate. My mom started crying. And I don't mean tearing up, I mean full-on sobbing, like I'd told her I had a terminal illness or something. What followed was the worst argument we'd ever had. My dad called me ungrateful and said I was throwing away everything they'd worked for. My mom kept asking where they went wrong, saying she couldn't even recognize me. I tried to explain why the program actually excited me, why it felt right, but my dad cut me off with a line I'll never forget. No son of mine is going to waste his life like that. Then came the kicker. If you're too stupid to see the opportunity you're tossing out, maybe you're not the son we thought you were. That was it for me. I snapped. Told them I was done trying to live my life just to make them happy. That I was almost an adult, and I had every right to figure things out for myself. That they never once really listened to what I wanted. We were all screaming at that point. It got bad, real bad. We all said some ugly stuff that night. Things I'm not proud of. But they went lower. Eventually, my dad said if I wasn't going to play by their rules and stick to their plan, then I could pack my things and leave. I think he expected me to back down. I didn't. I went upstairs, grabbed the emergency bag I'd already packed, told you I had a gut feeling, threw in whatever clothes I could fit, grabbed my laptop, the $1,250 I'd saved up, and all the important documents I'd stashed away, birth certificate, social security card. Paranoia for the win, I guess. When I came back downstairs, bags in hand, they looked stunned. Like they hadn't actually thought I'd go through with it. My mom started begging me to think it through. Told me I was making a huge mistake. That I didn't know how hard life really was. She had this smug little smirk on her face, like she knew I'd fail and come crawling back. My dad didn't say a word. Just stood there with his arms crossed, then slammed the door behind me as I stepped outside. I stood there on the lawn for a minute, totally numb. The rain had just started to come down. It felt weirdly fitting. I remember thinking, wow, this feels like something out of a movie. Then I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Luke. His parents were decent people. They let me crash on their couch that first night. The next few days were a blur. Back then, I was still trying to finish school while juggling 1,000 other things, figuring out where I'd sleep, how I'd scrape together my next meal, and basically being forced to become an adult overnight. My brain couldn't focus on anything for long. I kept having these sudden, crushing realizations like, damn, I'm actually homeless. I'd end up having panic attacks in the school bathroom. But weirdly, what kept me pushing through wasn't hope or support, it was sheer, bull-headed anger. There was no way in hell I was about to prove my parents right by going back with my tail between my legs. Luke's mom stepped in and helped me apply for emergency aid, since I technically counted as an unaccompanied minor. And the school's guidance counselor, one of the only adults who had ever really taken the time to hear me out, helped me figure out how to start the legal process of getting emancipated. I picked up more hours at my job and landed a second one scrubbing dishes at this small diner across town. But honestly, the toughest part wasn't the work or the money, it was dealing with the emotional side of things. I'd look around and see other kids with their regular, functioning families. I'd overhear classmates whining about stupid arguments with their parents, arguments that still ended with, "I love you." That kind of thing hit me hard. It made me realize what I grew up with wasn't normal. Most parents don't kick their kid out for wanting to go to trade school instead of a 4-year college. And that conditional kind of love my parents always gave me. Turns out, that's not how it's supposed to be. About 3 weeks after I left home, my mom sent me a text. She didn't ask how I was or say sorry. No, it was more like, when you're ready to apologize and accept help, our way, you can come home. I left it on read. A week later, my dad called and left a voicemail. Same vibe. They were both so convinced I was going to crash and burn, just waiting for the moment I'd crawl back, begging, so they could say, "Told you so." But that didn't happen. I ended up graduating high school while crashing on Luke's couch. My parents even showed up to the ceremony. Guess they wanted to keep up appearances. Afterward, they tried to talk to me, but I just turned and walked away. I didn't have a single word left for them. By June, I'd saved up just enough to move into a rundown apartment with 2 other guys. It was a total dump, but it was mine. Well, 1/3 mine. Still, no one could throw me out as long as I paid my share. I signed up for a trade program, covered by a scholarship, and I kept working almost full-time to pay the rest. It was brutal, but every time I felt like quitting, I'd picture my mom's smug little smirk or the sound of my dad slamming the door behind me, and somehow I'd keep pushing. That first year out on my own. Hands down, the hardest time of my life. I was constantly drained, scared, and lonely. Some nights I'd cry myself to sleep just from missing that idea of having a family, even if mine was messed up. And yeah, there were mornings where I'd wake up completely numb, no energy to face the day. But I still got up. Every damn time. And here's the thing, I never went crawling back. Not after a week, not after a month. Not ever. This is getting kinda long, so if anyone's still interested, I'll post part 2 tomorrow. That's when things slowly started to shift for me. Still had a long way to go, though. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this to get so much attention. Really appreciate all the support. Part 2's coming tomorrow. Update 1, thanks again for all the love on the last post. I honestly didn't expect so many people to relate to this story. Anyway, picking up where I left off, those first few months living on my own were straight up hell. Not gonna lie. After those first few weeks crashing at Luke's place, I managed to find this absolute crap hole of an apartment with 2 roommates. One was Marcus, who worked night shifts and I barely ever saw. The other was Tyler, who I'm pretty sure was selling something shady, but he kept to himself and paid rent on time, so I didn't ask questions. The place was nasty. Roaches so bold, they'd wave hello when you flicked on the kitchen light. The shower had this habit of going ice cold right in the middle of a rinse. Nothing like screaming with shampoo in your eyes at 6 a.m. And the walls? Might as well have been made of paper. I knew way too much about the couple fighting next door. But for all that, it was mine. At least, a third of it was. As long as I paid rent, nobody could tell me to leave. I was juggling 2 dead-end jobs, evenings at a hardware store and weekends at the diner. Between that and trying to get through trade school, I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. My diet was mostly instant ramen, eggs, and whatever leftover pancakes or fries I could sneak home from the diner. I dropped like 22 pounds in just a few months. I probably looked like a zombie most days. The weirdest part was scrolling Instagram and seeing people my age posting college parties, beach trips, family holidays, just living their best lives. Meanwhile, I was over here doing mental math to figure out if I could put off laundry another week because I needed those quarters for bus fare. My parents reached out a few times, but it was always the same BS. When are you gonna stop being stubborn and come home? Ready to follow the plan yet? Not once did they ask how I was doing. Not even a, hey, you got food in the fridge? Just more, you'll see we were right eventually. One time, my dad even showed up at the hardware store, about 3 months after I left home. I was restocking light bulbs when my coworker goes, hey, there's some guy in khakis asking for you. I peeked out, and there he was, standing in the middle of the aisle looking completely out of place among all the tools and paint cans. I ducked back into the stockroom and stayed there until he finally gave up. Watched from the window as he stood in the parking lot for like 15 minutes, then got in his car and drove off. He never came back. Things finally started to shift about 4 months in. There was this one regular customer at the hardware store, William. He was always coming in, picking up supplies for random projects. So there I was, just doing my job at the hardware store, when this regular, William, came in looking for some specific sink parts. I didn't just find the parts for him either. I walked him through how to install them and even sketched out a quick diagram to make it clear. Turns out, William worked in home renovations, mostly kitchens and bathrooms. After our chat, he looked at me and asked if I'd ever thought about lending a hand on some of his projects. Said I clearly knew what I was doing. The pay was better than the store, and it actually lined up with what I was learning in trade school. It felt like the first real break I'd gotten since leaving home. William was nothing like my dad. He didn't look down on guys who worked with their hands, he respected it. He took pride in his craft. He'd literally stop in the middle of installing a faucet just to show me the proper way to seal a gasket or explain why a certain method worked better. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone actually saw what I could be, not just what they wanted me to be. Around the 6-month mark, my parents started shifting their approach. My mom began texting me that she missed me. My dad sent a message saying they'd be open to compromising on the whole education thing, if I came back home. Honestly, that just ticked me off all over again. Like, oh, now that I've proven I'm not completely helpless, I can come home and be allowed to make some of my own choices. Yeah, no thanks. Hard pass. I wrapped up my first year of trade school with decent grades. Surprise, surprise, I wasn't dumb. I just needed to be learning something I actually gave a damn about. William started giving me more responsibility. Along with it came better pay. I managed to move out of the roach-infested apartment and into a slightly less terrible one with just one roommate, Jack, a nursing student. Dude was just as broke as me, but at least he understood how soap and trash bags worked. By the time I turned 19, I'd earned my first certification and was making decent money. Not the kind of cash that makes your Instagram pop off, but enough to buy real food, pay my bills on time, and even save a little. William started passing along weekend side jobs, small repairs, installations, that sort of thing. I was slowly building up a rep and getting my own clients. One strange thing about working inside people's homes, you get these glimpses into what normal families look like. I'd be fixing a light fixture and hear a mom telling her kid how proud she was of AB on a math test. Or I'd see family photos, vacations, birthdays, graduations. You could just feel the difference. These people fought, sure, but you could tell the love was real and didn't come with strings attached. It was eye-opening. Made me realize how warped my own family situation had been. Not long before I turned 20, my mom showed up at my apartment completely unannounced. Still don't know how she got my address, probably some mutual Facebook connection. I barely recognized her standing there. She looked older, more worn down. I let her in because, well, I didn't know what else to do. The whole thing was painfully awkward. She glanced around like she was taking mental notes, judging, but trying not to show it. Asked me a bunch of small talk questions about work and my apartment, and then got to what she really came for. Apparently, my dad had been passed over for a promotion and money was tight. She wanted to know if I could pitch in. I actually laughed. The sheer nerve. 2 years ago, they kicked me out and told me I'd crash and burn. Now here she was, asking for help like I owed them something. I told her I was still getting on my feet and couldn't spare anything. She left looking annoyed, like I'd somehow failed her again. Not once did she say she was proud of me for making it this far. After that visit, I hit a weird emotional wall. Started second-guessing everything. Was I being too hard on them? Should I give them another chance? But then I'd remember how they treated me, how they never once apologized, and that anger would come rushing back. Jack noticed I was in a funk and introduced me to his friend Rose, a psych student. We hit it off and became close friends. She helped me unpack some of the emotional mess I hadn't really dealt with. She explained that what I went through was emotional abuse. That love tied to obedience isn't love, it's control. Talking with her helped me start untangling all the guilt and self-doubt I'd been carrying around. By 21, I was doing well enough to get my own place. Just a modest one-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy, but all mine. No roommates, no parents. Just me. The day I moved in, I sat down on this beat-up IKEA couch I'd bought secondhand and cried. Like, ugly cried. Because I remembered standing on that front lawn at 17 with nothing but a bag of clothes and nowhere to go. And now here I was. Around that time, William offered me something steadier, more consistent work with actual benefits. Health insurance, even. First time I'd had coverage since I left home. He said business was booming, and he needed someone reliable. That offer meant more to me than any "I'm proud of you" my parents could have said. My parents kept trying to reconnect, but only when they could control the terms. They'd invite me to Thanksgiving or Christmas, then slip in these snide comments about my choices. They'd offer help, but it always came with strings attached. Every conversation left me drained, frustrated, like I was just walking back into the same toxic cycle. So I started pulling back. Limited it to the occasional text. Maybe a holiday visit, if I was feeling generous. What they never got was that I was doing okay. I had a life now, a good one. Sure, it didn't look like what they'd mapped out for me, but it was honest work that I enjoyed. It paid the bills. I had friends who cared. A roof over my head. Some peace. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation for any of it. Same living room. Same beige furniture, same family photos lining the walls, now featuring that graduation photo I never thought would happen. And that same overpowering apple cinnamon air freshener my mom insists on using, even though it always gave me a headache. But walking in, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like visiting someone else's house. That small gathering was just my parents, my aunt and uncle, and some work friend of my dad's, Jack, and his wife. Everyone acted like this was completely normal. Like I'd just come back from college, not from being effectively exiled at 17. I spent the whole evening waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally did, after dinner. My dad pulled me into his study, the study. The room I was never allowed in growing up unless I had express permission and a good reason. He started with casual small talk, tossing out comments about the economy, how times are tough, and all that. Then he got to the point. He'd been downsized. 27 years at the same company, and they replaced him with some kid fresh out of school who'll work for half his salary. The irony was so thick it almost choked me. All those years pushing me toward college, and now here he was, bitter about college grads. He didn't ask me for money, not directly. But the hints were crystal clear. Stuff like, family supports each other, and, just until we get back on our feet. Meanwhile, all I could think about was that night they threw me out. My mom's smug look, the absolute confidence that I'd be back within a month, begging for help. I told him I'd think about it. That was the most I could manage without saying something I couldn't take back. Sandy and I left not long after. In the car, she looked over and said, "Well, that was the most passive-aggressive dinner I've ever survived." And yeah, pretty much nailed it. Over the next couple of weeks, the texts from my mom started coming more often. Just checking in. Asking if I'd thought about what Dad mentioned. Dropping subtle hints like, "Do you need a dining table? We're updating the house." Translation, "We're selling furniture to scrape together money." Meanwhile, my own life was finally settling into something solid. I'd landed a steady job, nothing glamorous, but reliable with decent pay and actual benefits. Sandy and I were getting serious. We started talking about maybe getting a place together, since my shoebox studio barely fit one person and her roommate situation was chaotic. Then came the Facebook post. My mom wrote this long, melodramatic thing about how God has a plan, and how they were going through a challenging season of faith after Dad's job loss. Lots of spiritual fluff. Standard sympathy bait. But it was the last paragraph that stopped me cold. "We're so blessed to have our son Michael supporting us through this trial. Family truly is everything." I nearly spit out my coffee. Supporting them? I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't given them a single cent. And here she was, painting this public image of me as the prodigal son come home with open arms and an open wallet. The comments were full of praise. "What a good son. Raised right. Bless you, Michael." I called her immediately. Asked her what the hell that post was about. She played it off, said she was just being grateful for my emotional support. That people assume things on their own. But it was clear what she was doing, creating public pressure. Trying to corner me into playing the role she'd assigned me in her redemption arc. That night, Sandy found me hunched over my laptop, making a spreadsheet, trying to figure out if I could help them financially without completely wrecking my own life. She sat next to me, took my hand, and said, "What would you tell a friend in your situation?" That hit hard. Because if a friend told me their parents had kicked them out at 17, ignored them for years, and only came back around when they needed something, I'd tell them they didn't owe those people a damn thing. So I made a decision. I texted my mom. Told her I wouldn't be providing financial support. That I understood things were hard, but I was still building my own life, still recovering from being thrown out as a teenager. I included a list of local resources for job seekers and financial assistance. The same ones I'd had to turn to when I was on my own. Her response. One word, okay. Then silence. For 3 weeks. Until yesterday. My phone exploded, calls, texts, voicemails. My parents. My aunt. My uncle. Everyone suddenly reaching out. Turns out, things had gotten worse. My dad still hadn't found work. They were on the brink of foreclosure. And somehow, this had now officially become my problem to solve. One voicemail from my aunt actually said, "You need to step up and be the man your father raised you to be." I laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that's more about disbelief than humor. Because the man my father raised me to be apparently wasn't good enough to stay in the house past 17. But now I'm supposed to be his financial safety net. Sandy and I stayed up late that night, talking. About boundaries. About guilt. About the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. About what we could live with, emotionally and financially. I still don't know exactly what I'm going to do. Part of me wants to help, because despite everything, they're still my parents. But another part remembers standing on that lawn, holding my bags, being told I'd never make it without them. And now, almost a decade later, the roles are reversed. They couldn't have imagined this. Hell, I couldn't have imagined this. I've got some conditions in mind, if I do decide to help. Clear boundaries. Lines that won't be crossed again. Then my cousin called. I knew something was up. When I finally answered, I could barely understand my mom through the sobs. Eventually, she managed to get it out. My dad had been laid off again, this time for good. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, the car had died, and now they'd gotten an official eviction notice. 2 weeks. That's all they had left before losing the house. I sat there in my office, surrounded by plaques and certifications, physical proof of everything I'd built since they kicked me out, and felt nothing. Actually, that's not true. I felt annoyed. Annoyed that after Lily years, we were still playing this same game. Them calling in a panic. Me being expected to drop everything and swoop in like the dutiful son they never earned. And of course, it was the worst timing. I had the most important meeting of my entire career the next day, potential investors, real money, the culmination of everything I'd clawed my way toward. So I told her I'd call back, hung up, and just stared at the wall for a while. Sandy came in, took one look at me, and immediately knew something was off. After I told her, she didn't try to fix it or tell me what to do. She just asked, "How do you want to handle it?" That's one of the million reasons I love her. So I made a decision, investors first. Parents later. One crisis at a time. I turned my phone off. 0 distractions. Buried myself in my notes and slides, trying to keep all that emotional chaos from bleeding into the professional moment I'd been working toward for years. And the meeting? It went great. Better than I'd hoped. They asked hard questions, but I was ready. They were impressed. They even mentioned being interested in future projects. I left that room buzzing, feeling this high I can't even describe, like validation and freedom and maybe a little bit of revenge, all rolled into one. Then I turned my phone back on. 27 missed calls. Voicemails from my parents, aunts, uncles, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My Facebook notifications were out of control. Messenger was flooded. My mom had put the full court press on the entire family. When I got home, Sandy had this look on her face, concern mixed with "you're not going to believe this." She handed me her laptop. My mom had posted this long, weepy Facebook message about trusting in God during hard times, how their house was being taken, and how certain people had forgotten what family means. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. The comments were brutal. Relatives piling on with guilt. "I'm sure Michael will step up. Family comes first. You raised him right, I'm sure he'll come through." It wasn't even subtle. It was a full-blown public shaming campaign. I stood there reading it all, blood pressure spiking, hands shaking. The manipulativeness. The entitlement. The sheer audacity. That was the moment. I decided I was done. Done with half boundaries. Done with vague guilt and polite check-ins. If this relationship was going to exist, it had to be real. Honest. Or not at all. So I texted them. Said I'd come by the next morning. Just me and them. Face to face. Nothing left unsaid. I barely slept that night. Kept running through scenarios in my head. Sandy just held me and reminded me of something simple but powerful. No matter what happens tomorrow, you've already built a family. Me. Us. You're not alone anymore. The next morning, I drove to their house. The neighborhood looked the same, but the house, not so much. The paint was peeling. The lawn overgrown. The flower beds my mom used to obsess over were choked with weeds. It was like their entire decline had been poured into the physical bones of that house. My dad answered the door. He looked smaller. Older. Shoulders slumped like he was carrying invisible weights. He didn't say anything. Just nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the house was dusty. Cluttered. Smelled faintly like stale coffee and regret. My mom sat at the kitchen table, red-eyed and already mid-sob. As soon as she saw me, she launched into the script. "Thank God you're here. We knew you'd help." I cut her off. Told them both to sit down. Because for once, I was going to talk. And they were going to listen. I laid it all out. How they threw me out over wanting a life that didn't match their blueprint. How they told me I'd fail. How for years, the only time they contacted me was when they needed something. How they never once apologized in a real way. How I spent my early adulthood in survival mode, crashing on couches, working myself to exhaustion, teaching myself how to adult because they had chosen pride over parenting. My dad tried to cut in with the same tired excuses. "We were doing what we thought was best. You're being disrespectful." I just raised a hand and kept going. Told them I'd cried myself to sleep most nights that first year. That their silence hurt more than the eviction. That they don't get to suddenly remember family when their backs are against the wall. My mom cried harder. Said they'd made mistakes, but they were still my parents. That family sticks together. And yeah, that's when I really lost it. I asked where all this family sticks together energy was when I was sleeping in my car. When I needed someone, anyone, and they were too wrapped up in appearances and control. The conversation circled for a while. Half-hearted apologies followed by justifications. Every time we got close to something real, they backed off. Classic pattern. So I shut it down and laid out my terms. I would help them avoid foreclosure this one time. After that, they'd need to downsize. No second bailouts. They had to take down that Facebook post and publicly correct the narrative. Let people know they were handling things privately. If they wanted any future relationship, we'd do therapy. All of us. Not to magically heal everything, but to have real conversations with someone who could call out the BS. From here on out, my life, my choices, my relationship, my boundaries, were not up for debate. Any support, financial or otherwise, would depend on respecting that. I expected a fight. Guilt. Begging. Gaslighting. Instead, my dad just looked defeated. Like a man who realized the well had run dry. My mom. Harder to read. She looked like someone watching a tower she built brick by brick come crashing down, and still not fully believing it was gone. Funny how life turns out. Lily years ago, they were convinced I couldn't make it a month on my own. Now they can't survive without me. Still not sure if that's karma or just the universe's sense of humor.